Good afternoon and welcome to this video number 3 on the Xero seminar series. So this video we're going to be going through the sales invoice section within Xero. So you can access that screen by just clicking on the dashboard on the invoices owed to you, or you can go to accounts and sales and it will take you to the same area. So within the accounts sales screen you'll see a view very similar to this one. So you'll have, firstly, any invoices that you have sitting in draft. If you are using an approval process, you'll see any invoices sitting in there. If you're not, make sure that that stays as none. Any invoices that you have approved and sent off for payment or are ready to be sent for payment will sit in the awaiting payments list. Any of those invoices that are overdue will also sit in the overdue list. So like what we talked about in the first video in relation to bank reconciliations, this amount here is included in this total here. So it's not a case of you're owed $2,800 plus $690. You're still only owed $2,800. You can click on any of these boxes and it will give you the list of the invoices that relate to the particular total. You can also hover over this area here where you can look at the list of the top people, the people that owe you the most, and if there are any amounts that are overdue for that particular customer, they will show in red on the right hand side. Once again, they are inclusive totals as well. If you prefer pie, and let's face it, who doesn't, you can click on the pie chart and it will show you a breakdown of your invoices in a pie chart format. If you hover over them, you can also see any phone number information if you've loaded that into Xero, which can help to quickly see which clients you should be following up and the numbers that you can call them on. You can also look at a bar chart on the left-hand side, which will give you a breakdown of the invoice amounts that you are expecting to come in the various months, broken into segments based on the amounts that you are expecting to come in. And once again, it will provide you with that phone number information that can be useful. So the first thing I want to show you is that you can obviously do normal bog standard invoices within Xero, but there are a few other tools that you can also look at using. So the first one is if you click on the arrow rather than the plus new button, you get a few other options. So the first one is invoice as normal, and then quotes, and then you have something called repeating invoices. So if you have customers where you send them a regular invoice and it's always the same each time, whether it's weekly or monthly or however often it needs to be, you can create a repeating invoice template. So if you click on this, it will look very similar to a standard invoice that you would put into Xero, except it has this box up the top where you can set how often that invoice is repeating, so whether it's weekly or monthly, the first invoice date, so the first invoice that you want to raise, what the payment terms are, so whether it's due on a particular day of the current month, after invoice date, whatever that needs to be. If the repeating invoice is only to run for a set period of time, you can put an end date in here if need be, otherwise leave it blank. If you need to make changes to the invoice each time it's generated, maybe a small tweak to some information in it, you can choose the Save as Draft option. What that means is each time that invoice is generated, each time the particular date, I should say, when the rule is generated, it will put the invoice in as a draft invoice, and it will then act as a prompt effectively for you to remember to invoice this person and change the details as need be. If, however, the invoice doesn't change, you can just choose Approve. So that means each time the particular date rolls around, it will put an approved invoice straight into your invoice list without you having to do anything. You also have the option to choose Approve for sending. So that means that you can then send those invoices directly from this particular repeating invoice template rather than having to send them each time. Key thing to note is that if you want to make sure that when you are choosing Approve for sending, that all the details you're putting in are correct and that you will not have to change them each month, because otherwise what you may end up doing is sending incorrect invoices to clients, which we want to avoid. Another particular type of invoice that you can create is a group invoice. So if you create a contact group, and we'll go into contact groups a bit more when we get to that particular webinar, that group will show in this list here. You can click on that group and it will then, once again, pull up a very similar invoice template, but instead of the contact box, it will have your particular contact group. Enter in the invoice as you need it to be shown or however you want that invoice to look. Then click Create Draft Invoices. What Xero will now do is it will take whatever information you've created in here, and for each of the contacts within your contact group, it will create an individual draft invoice ready for you to go in and just check that the information is correct and then approve it. So rather than having to enter multiple invoices, enter one and get a list of all those draft invoices, and then you can just approve each one once you're happy with the details as they are, which can help speed up your entering of invoices much more. The next thing we're going to quickly look at is the quotes within Xero. So you'll see that down underneath the invoice area, there is a quote section. So if you do send quotes to customers and you are using the invoice section within Xero, I would recommend having a look at the quote system within Xero. So we'll have a quick run through it now just so you can see how it works. So if you want to enter a new quote, click on the arrow, choose quote, and it will then pull up a screen, once again, similar to the invoices, but with a bit of a change on a few areas. Put in the contact as normal. The date will default to today's date. You can set default expiry dates in your settings, or you can click on the down arrow, choose any of the default options that are showing here, or just pick a date using the calendar. Quote numbers are defaults. Once again, if you want to change the numbering of that, that can also be done in settings. Put in a reference if you need to. If you have multiple branding themes with your quotes, you can choose whichever one you're using here. If not, that box won't show. If you wish to add a title and a summary with your particular quote for when you send it off to the customer, you can add that in to these boxes here. Title has a 100 character limit, and the summary has a 3,000 character limit. You can then enter each of the individual lines for the quote, put in any specific terms if need be, otherwise the terms will come through from your invoice settings that you've set up. Once you're ready, you can then click on send and it will prompt you for an email address if it doesn't already have one in the system for the contact you've put the quote against. You can then send that quote on to your customers and it will, or customer, and it will then show in the sent item list like this one that I prepared earlier. The beauty of sending the quotes from Xero is that when your customer gets an email to say that they've got a quote that you've sent through to them and that they want, and that you want them to go and have a look at it, they can view that quote online. There is a link within each of the quote email addresses which will take them to a page similar to the one that you can see at the moment. From this page, clients can accept the quote, decline it, or put a comment. They can also print off a PDF as need be. And the other option is that once you have finished all these details and they have accepted it, the beauty of this is it will send that information back through to your Xero file. And so you can see in real time whether a client's accepted or declined or looked at a quote. And also another thing to note is your clients do not need to be on Xero for this functionality to work. Once a client's accepted the quote, it will move it from sent into the accepted area. If they've declined it, it will move to the declined area. In this case, they've just verbally told us over the phone that it's been accepted. So we go into the quote, click on options and mark as accepted. And from here, we can create an invoice, or we can click on the options and select copy to. And we can copy this to another quote. We can copy it to an invoice if we're going through a different way of entering in the invoice. We can also copy this to a purchase order. So if there's particular products that you need to send an order to your suppliers for based on this quote, you can generate that from here. And you can also do the same with bills as well. In this case, we just want to create an invoice. So I'm going to click Create Invoice. It will then prompt you with this box. So if you are going to raise multiple invoices from your quote, make sure that it's only on your last invoice that you tick the marked as invoice box. The reason for that is it will leave the quote sitting in your accepted list up until the point that you tick the mark as invoiced button. Once you tick that, it moves to your invoiced quotes list, which means it won't show on that dashboard list anymore. You can still find it, but it is much easier if you leave this unticked until you're raising your final invoice. So in this case, I am raising my final invoice, so I'm just going to click Create after I've ticked Mark as Invoice. And it will now pull through all the details that I've entered into my quote, including the quote reference. All I need to do is make sure that I've put the due date in as it needs to be. I can then click Approve and then send that invoice off to the customer. The idea of using the quotes within Xero is that it saves you having to enter information more than once. So the next thing I'll just quickly go through is entering invoices into Xero. So for those of you that are already using this, you're probably quite familiar with the process of entering an invoice into Xero. So all I'm going to show you is just a few tips and tricks on how to speed up that process. So as you all know, when you're entering in the contact into the system, just start typing the name, and Xero will look for any of the contacts within your list that happen to match to that name. You can then click on that contact. The date will default to today's date. If you have a default due date set up, that will automatically pull through. However, there's a few tools that you can use to speed up the entering of that due date if you do have to enter it manually. If it's, say, a set number of days after the invoice, just hit plus and then put however many days it is after the invoice date. So in this case, the due date's 20 days after invoice date. So I've just entered plus 20, hit tab, and it will automatically pull on the date for you. If it's a set day of the following month, hit star and then type the number. So in this case, it's due 20th of the month following. I've just typed star and 20, and it automatically pulls through that date. The invoice number is default depending on whatever you've entered in. Then there's the option for reference and choosing branding theme. And now one of the new things that Xero has brought out is the option to preview your invoice. So if you click on the preview button here, you can see how your invoice looks on a computer screen by selecting this icon, or on a mobile phone by clicking on this icon. So that gives you a quick chance to see that, okay, this is how the invoice will look. Do I need to choose a different template, or is this how I want it to show? You can also attach documents to invoices as well. This can be quite useful if you're actually wanting to send documents with your invoice in question. So say if you've got particular terms, conditions, or other information that you wish to send with that invoice, click on the icon, either add from your file library or upload from your computer. And then when the document shows, there's a wee action code that you can click on where you can tick include with invoice. So that means that when you send off that invoice to your customers, you can send this attachment with it as well. Once again, like what we talked about with add details and also with quotes, if you have items set up within Xero, you can choose them from this list, or you can create brand new ones from here. If you have particular lines that you put on your invoices that you want to show, but you don't actually keep stock for them, so a labor line or a particular service that you provide, you can add these by entering in some default code. So we'll just call this service. Deluxe. And then the key thing is to not tick this. If you tick this box here, you're saying that you keep a quantity of this particular thing on hand. So say you were selling calculators. You would tick, I track this item on, because you physically hold a set number of calculators. But because this is just a service line, we leave that unticked. You can then put in default unit prices, choose the account that this goes against. So we'll say this is $200, and it always goes against sales. Click Save, and it will then put that line automatically into your invoice. So if you have any lines that you use on a regular basis, even if you have to tweak them slightly, it may be useful looking at setting up those items to help speed up your invoice entering. Xero also has a feature which supports it called machine learning. So as you're typing in sales information, once you've entered in a quantity, if Xero is used to you using a particular sales code, excuse me, it will automatically put that account into this area here. Like what we talked about with the coding, it doesn't always get it right. So if that code is wrong, you can override it. But if it's right, great, you've saved a bit of time. Once you've finished entering the invoice, you can either click Save to save it as draft or click Approve. When you're finished with the invoice, you can click Print PDF just to print it off, or you can go to Email. You will also notice that at the bottom of the screen, you will see you've got the ability to receive a payment. Now, unless the payment has gone somewhere other than your bank account, so say you've pocketed the money yourself, or it's been put off against an owner's current account, or something along those lines, it's not gone through your bank account, then yes, you can use this payment area here. Otherwise, I recommend not using it, because what can often happen is if the payment amounts don't agree, it can cause all sorts of problems when you're reconciling your bank rec side of things. And the other thing is that Xero, if it sees that $600 amount come through and it matches it correctly, Xero will actually enter that payment information for you. So it will actually save you some time. So only enter in a payment if it's not going to a bank account that you've set up in Xero. Otherwise, let Xero do the work for you. So back on the invoice screen. Next thing I just want to quickly show you is how to email the invoices. So you can either, in an individual invoice, you can email them, or you can tick off a whole heap, click on email, and it will then pull in all the individual email addresses that you've set up within the system, and it will generate a separate email for each of the clients that you've got on the list. Now, if there's any attachments with those invoices, you can tick this box here, and it will include any of the files that you've attached to that invoice as attachments to the email that you're sending. Now, the other thing that's quite useful is this include PDF attachment of invoice option. So if you want to, you can email your invoices and include a PDF attachment of that invoice for your customers. However, if you have customers that are particularly bad at paying, I recommend leaving this unticked. The reason for that is when they click on that particular email and then they click on the link that's in there to see the invoice, which would be sitting in this part of the email, you will then have an update back in Xero that will tell you that that invoice has been viewed, and you can go into that particular invoice, look at the history and notes, and you'll be able to see the time when it was viewed and the date. So that means if the customer tries to tell you that they haven't seen the invoice that you've sent through to them, you can tell them that they need to find a better excuse. So that can be quite useful if you have customers that aren't the best at paying. So the last thing in the sales section that I want to cover off is invoice reminders. So Xero has a reminder system that you can set up that will enable you to send out automated reminders for any invoices that are overdue. So if you tick this option on, by default, it has reminders for 7 days, 14 days, and 21 days. You can customize these, you can change the dates, you can do whatever you like with that. You can also include a link to the invoice PDF if you want to, or untick that if need be. And you can also choose a benchmark to say, okay, if the invoice is $10 or less, for example, don't send a reminder. Key thing to note with this is that invoice reminders will work well if you keep on top of your reconciling in Xero. If you don't keep on top of that, what will happen is that if you have invoice payments that have come in that haven't been matched to an invoice, you will find that your customers are getting reminders for invoices which they have already paid. And that tends to not sit too well with them. So before you think about using the reminder system, make sure that you are able to keep on top of the coding so that this system will actually work for you rather than just aggravate your clients. So that concludes the section on sales invoices. So the next video that I'm going to be doing will be on purchases in Xero.